we are going to do a quick revise on some of the tools that we've used here. For the mirror here, we've used the wand tool, so W and the wand tool, which is great for selecting just big blocks of color. And then for some of the others, we've got the little horse's mouth here, which we used the quick selection tool. For the face and the body here, this one's all liquefied now, but we did use the object selection tool for a bunch of this, and then some of the brush tool as well. So if you do look over here on the left, we do see that we have the shortcuts for a lot of these tools. So lasso tools, elliptical tools, quick selection, magic wand, and the object selection tool. And then finally the pen tool. And I want to look at this little mustache here. So this one can be quite an interesting one. So I did put this one in for a reason. So if you can find mustache, this one's called mustache copy. I'm going to drag this one to the top as well. And again, let's just focus in on that one as well. So I'm going to transform it, Command or Control T. Let's drag up. So we get a nice bit of detail. Again, this is a good resolution here. And if we zoom in close, oh my gosh, look at all these little fibers and stuff like that. So you can kind of imagine where we're going with this. This is quite a tricky one potentially to deal with. So we definitely don't want to use the brush tool. We don't want to use the lasso tool. Object selection, quick selection are going to struggle with this, particularly with the drop shadow. So as an example, if I go magic wand tool and I go, hey, let's select an area here, straight away it's getting some white areas in here, it's missing some areas here, even if I hit shift, and it's just going to be messy. So Command Control D, deselect. So what we're going to do for this one is we're going to do the best we can. I'm going to try the object selection tool, and as you can see, that actually does a pretty easy selection. If it doesn't, then you may need to use the other tools to get as close a selection as you can. So this one's quite defined, so I'm going to click on that. Let's just see what that looks like as a mask. So it can actually look pretty good. So I'm going to unselect that. It's actually done a reasonable job there. I'm just going to click out of that. It's still got some really weirdy bits on the end. It's missed a whole lot there. So I'm going to undo that. Command Z. And I'm going to go back to my object selection tool. Now there is an option here, obviously. Select and mask. Select subject. And you can try that, and that will take us into mask mode, but it's not great. Alright, I'm just going to bring up my contextual taskbar, and here's a little taskbar down the bottom here, and select subject. Let's try to remove background, see if that looks anything better. Not really, hasn't really done much for us. Select subject again. Alright, that's pretty good, but it's a bit scruff. Now we do have some tools here, but I want to ignore those for now. I want to again, I'm just going to deselect. Let's just do it normally. I'm going to select that, hit the mask button, and let's deal. So I'm going to just don't like seeing that pink section there, so I'm just going to go in there. All right, let's jump into the mask mode. So this is doing a pretty good job, but let's go into the mask mode here. So double click on the mask, and we enter mask mode. Now if that doesn't work, occasionally it won't work, you can right click on the mask, and let's go into, I don't usually do it this way, mask options, I think it is. No, wrong one. Told you I don't do this much. Select and mask. There we go. Select and mask will take us into the mask mode, and we're in a entirely different workspace here, and this specifically is dealing with masks. Now the first things I want to look at is, surprisingly, is actually this section over here on the right. This is the view section. This is how we're going to see our mask compared to our background. So what if we mask, what haven't we masked? So in these view options here, if we drop that down, there's a bunch of different options in here. Onion skinning is usually the first. It's at the top there, it's the default. And then we want to have a look at the transparency. So transparency low, we're going to see everything we've got visible. Transparency high, we're going to gradually get rid of what's there. So this is important because there might be little hairs and stuff that we might have missed. So we need to kind of play with that to make sure that we've got what we want. So we might need to play with that. So let's have a quick look at some of the other views. Each image is going to have its own little thing to choose from. Marching ants, that will give you a quick indication of what is visible. And this can be useful if there's like little weird bits that are just sort of hanging out by themselves. So I don't know why that keeps toggling off. So these little bits are kind of floating and stuff like that, but I can see them with the marching ants on. So that can be useful. Overlay is a pretty good one because overlay will place a color in the background, so nice contrasting color. The default is this pretty much stock standard full saturation red. If you do need to change that, if your object is a different color that's contrasting, go for it. And once again, you can kind of slide that opacity for that on and off. All right, on black is going to give us, as it says, on black, it's kind of like red, and on white, it's going to give us on white. On layers is going to allow you to see everything behind it. And again, you can toggle that on and off. This one's actually really important. So black and white is surprisingly important. I'll show you why in a moment. So I'm actually going to go to onion skinning. This one's great because it allows me to see what I'm kind of missing. So I'm going to turn the transparency up to 100%. We're going to have a look at that. All right, so I'm going to grab this very first tool at the top here, and when you do this, this is actually, if I hover over that, it's going to tell us this is our quick selection tool. So this works just like the in the regular interface. It's got a little plus sign or a minus sign. By default, it's going to be plus. If you hit Alt, it's going to be subtract. And what you can do with this is you can kind of drag through and unselect areas, or take your finger. I got my finger on Alt or Option key there, or drag through and rebuild. So you can kind of use that the same way. Next one down is, this is one of the best tools out there. It's called the Refine Edge Brush tool, and it literally does that. But before we do that one, because that one's really good, I'm going to skip to the next one. This is just our brush tool, and again, use those square brackets to adjust your size. And this works in either a positive or negative, just like a brush. So if I hold down the Alt key, which I am now, I can subtract, and if I take my finger off Alt, I can add. So this one's pretty useful, especially if you start making some like pretty big errors. With the Edge Refine tool, you can actually use this to try and scoop back areas that you might want to get a bit more detail. The next one down is literally what we had outside. So theoretically, well, not theoretically, but actually, you can bring a single layer into mask mode. You just add a mask, open up mask mode, open it here, and you do have the object selection tool, and this works just the way it does outside of that. And then also we have the lasso tool. So lasso tool, just circle around, select an area, Alt, subtract an area, like that. So that that does what it needs to do. And then we've got hand tool and zoom tool, which are pretty standard anyway. All right, let's have a look at this tool. This is the Refine Edge Brush tool. Now, this is pretty good in the sense that it is a manual analog for this. I'm going to show you this first. Again, adjust your brush size, and what you can do with that is you basically brush over the edge of a layer, and it will start trying to get those finicky little hairs and stuff like that. So as you can see, I'm just doing it gradually. If you do it gradually, if something weird happens, you can just hit Control Z, step back. Whereas if you do it in a single brush stroke, you're forcing it to really subtract a lot there. And there you go. I kind of made a bit of a mess up there, but that's okay. So that's getting a lot of detail here. Over here, I've kind of overdone it. And if you press the Alt or Option key, you can actually subtract from that and then try again. So you don't want to go too far with it. And also, if I zoom in here, I can actually see I've got a few errors with that. So I'm going to leave that for now. I haven't done a really good job of this, but it is a demo. And I'm going to just talk about this view mode over here. So once again, so I'm going to go to the view mode, and I'm actually going to go down to black and white. Now this is why black and white's really important, because it just views what is a mask in case the black area is going to be invisible, the white area is going to be visible, but also it's going to allow me to see any areas that maybe shouldn't be hidden. So like these little hairs here that are black are going to tell me that these are actually transparent. So if we put on something with a high contrast, that's actually going to show through. And there's a few bits over here which are kind of semi-grey, which maybe we don't want, and so on and so forth. And some areas here that probably need to be fixed up as well. So there's an opportunity in here to maybe do some fine tuning. So I could go with maybe my brush tool here, and I can paint in white and kind of fix some of those areas up that I know are supposed to be visible. And by the way, you can adjust your brush in here. If you're finding that one's too aggressive, you can change the hardness so you can get a soft brush and all that kind of stuff. So you can do a gradual brush in there. Now, in all honesty, at this moment, I do find there's a little bit of a lag, a bit of just a bit of weirdness with the brush and some of the other tools in the mask mode here. So sometimes I'll get a little bit frustrated with that, just the general kind of lag, and they tend to kind of be a bit clunky. And I will sometimes do this outside of mask mode. So I'll press OK, and then I'll go through in regular mode with a brush and fix some of the stuff up. And of course, if you hit Alt, you're going to get your negative for that. We've got a few other options in here which I do want to talk about as well, but I'm just going to clear that selection and let's go back to onion skinning there. And what I'm going to do now is just grab, I'm just going to cancel out of this altogether. So I'm going to cancel out, the reason for that is I just want to show you another option in this. So I'm going to go back and I'm actually going to delete this mask, and let's do it entirely inside mask mode. So I'm going to hit that mask button, there it is there, and either double click on that or right click, and let's go to select and mask. There we go. So now we're in mask mode. Alright, so in here again we do have our little tools here. So we've got our object selection tool. I'm going to click on that. Let's see how that works, and let's go to select subject. Cool, and let's just check our mask mode. So if you don't see any change, do check your mask mode. Alright, that's pretty brutal. It's not looking great. I'm going to quickly switch to quick select so I don't keep seeing that pink pop out. And if you look up the top here, there is also a button called refine hair. So this is an absolute time saver. So instead of necessarily having to go through the refine edge tool, which is manual, and that's usually a good thing in case things don't work, you can actually hit refine hair and it will do a pretty reasonable job. Now it obviously isn't perfect, so in this case I probably do need to go through with my refine hairbrush like so and just brush through a few of those areas there, and also fix up maybe a few with the brush or lasso tool just around here. So there are a few little things, and if I brush through this area here, you can see if you do play around with your levels, you can actually see there's a bunch of hairs that are also missing here, tiny little follicles, and this might be an option to actually jump in and sort of see if you can get some of those back. It is hit and miss because you don't have absolute control of this. You're kind of pushing it forwards and backwards and seeing what Photoshop will tolerate. So you get as much detail as you need, or that you can actually get in a good mode. Alright, so something like that. I can see there's a few issues in here, but I'm actually going to talk about those, how to fix those up manually outside of this. So again, depends on how much detail you actually need. Alright, let's have a quick look over here. So we've got some other options in here, and what these will actually do, you've got stuff like radius, which is going to expand out your mask selection. So you also have a smooth option, and what you're going to need to do sometimes for this to actually work is you're going to have to punch out the radius a bit and then smooth as well. Sometimes it won't actually appear to do much because this one's quite, it's got its own little thing, or it might take a moment. It actually just popped in a few moments there. It's smooth and unsmooth. So depending on what you want, smooth is kind of going to, if there are sort of real sort of clunky bits, it's going to kind of average them out. So it's good if you're doing like hard-bodied stuff or an object that's like a lamp or a table or something potentially. For hair, probably not so much. We've also got feather, and that's basically going to blur out our mask. So that's also going to kind of give us an average. So we're going to lose some precision in that. And then you've got your contrast, which is going to increase or decrease the contrast of your mask. Shift edge is a pretty handy one. So if you do have some selections and they're not quite where they're supposed to be, you can either push them out, which could be useful, or you can actually bring them in. So sometimes just bringing them in a couple of pixels will sort them out. But I'm going to set that back to 0. And I'm going to apply this mask. I'm going to hit OK. We're back into the regular workspace. Here's my mustache. Here's the mask. I've got that selected. So let's talk about a little bit of housekeeping around here. If I zoom in, you can see we've got some weird ghost stuff sort of happening here. We've even, we've got a little bit of whiteness or light bleed coming over from the follicles. As the light reflects off those, it's going to create a bit of a glow. And it's a real tricky one for Photoshop to kind of manage because we're dealing literally with sometimes, an individual pixel. So it's a real tricky one. I'm going to show you a couple of tricks that might help you just really define and get a really good cut from this. Alright, so the first one is we're going to do this on the mask, so make sure your mask is selected. And what some instances what might work is just using a brush tool, black selected, and you could potentially brush this in, but of course that's going to destroy anything we paint over unless you're super fanatical and super finessing, and I've got a couple of thousand hours to spare. Instead, what I'm going to direct you to is this little tool down here. Now, there's three of them. The shortcut is O. It's a tricky one to remember because, yeah, none of these begin with the letter O, but it's pretty useful. There's a dodge tool, a burn tool, and a sponge tool. And essentially, the dodge tool will lighten a layer or a mask. The burn tool will darken a layer or a mask. And the sponge tool won't do anything to a mask. It'll either, if you're on a layer, it will either increase the saturation or decrease the saturation, depending on your options. So with the mask select, if I select the dodge tool, it's actually going to lighten the mask. And of course, in mask world, the lighter it is, the more visible it is. So up at the top here, it is important to look at this area here. It's called the range. And we've got three options: highlights, midtones, and shadows. So if I want to actually, really get this to work, most of the time we have highlights select. I'm going to ramp up the exposure a bit because it's a demo and I really want to push this out, but usually subtlety is the key for this. And as I paint over this, what it's going to do is it's going to take any areas that already have a little bit of brightness to them and it's going to increase them. So you can see these hairs here. If I Command Z, you can see it's really just pushing them up a little bit. So sometimes you can hit into midtones and you can start getting stuff, but it'll start really, ramping that mask up and you're going to get more detail. So that can be useful if you've got an area that's kind of lagging. Maybe it's like partially transparent and you want that to be absolutely visible. So particularly say around here, there's a little bit of what's the word? Semi-transparency here. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to change the color there, just so you can kind of see that we do have a little bit of seeping through of color in the background. So this area of the mustache is semi-transparent. So that could be absolutely useful there. I'm going to select that mask again, hit O, and I've got midtone selected, but that should be good. And if I brush over this, let's get my exposure up pretty high. You have to kind of go over a few times sometimes, and that will hopefully start rebuilding that area. Now, of course, for that, I could just use a white brush because that's pretty obvious. But this way, if there are areas that do have some really dark areas, it's not going to affect those as much because it's only going to affect either the highlights or the midtones. And in this case, I want to only affect the midtones. So that's going to allow me to rebuild some of these areas that probably look a little bit like they should be visible, but might be semi-transparent. All right. So particularly around here as well, probably. So and let's just rebuild some of those. Cool. All right. Let's look at the opposite of this. So I'm going to hit Shift and O, or you can go to the Burn tool, and this does the opposite. It's going to get an area depending on your range, highlight, shadows, midtones, and make it darker. So make it more more invisible. Just looking at here, I think the blue might have worked a little bit better for what I'm going to do next. So let's choose that, and I'm just going to drop that into the background. Whoops, wrong one. That one. All right, so that's just punching out. Actually, might make it even darker for the demo. That's just really going to punch out the ghosty areas around here. So I'm going to hit O again, get my burn tool, and I'm going to set this to shadow. So I'm going to say, hey, anything that's a dark area already, like this, I want to be even darker. Make sure I select the mask this time. Alright, so there it is, burn tool. It's set to shadow. I'm going to drop my exposure a bit because this one can be quite brutal. And as you can see, as I brush over these little hairs, it keeps the areas that are already light and it darkens the ones that are a little bit darker. So this is going to really knock out those weird ghost bits, hopefully, but keep the bulk of those little hairs and stuff like that. Now I'm doing this pretty quickly, and as you can see, if you do it like a really high exposure, it can be quite devastating, so do play with that. You don't want it to be over the top. As far as that, you still want to keep some of your details and step that in. So look, that's getting closer. It's not perfect. I might need to step back into mask mode and just fix up these little areas here. I could try playing around with the burn tool and setting that to mid-tones and try dig in there. But I think honestly for that one, quick double click, open, grab into my edge refine tool or refine edge tool, and I could probably just do a little brush through on those as well and just clean those up. You might also want to play with the feather and stuff like that, the contrast, but that's pretty good. So hit OK. Alright, now if you are super pedantic with this as well, which you should be if it's a a really important aspect, you can use the blur tool. It's right here, and this, if you want to get some stuff that's kind of, you want to get a little bit more blur on it, I'm going to push the strength up with this because, again, demo, and that's going to kind of blur some edges, which can be useful if you're finding it's getting a little bit, sometimes you get these little pixel areas and stuff like that. But again, you need to be kind of careful between both your layer and your mask with that. So that's kind of getting there. But I do want to mention just one more little aspect that is super annoying with this, is that depending on your light source, you are going to get that little light bleed, particularly on little follicles and stuff like that. So if that is going to be an issue, which it quite often is, we need to find a solution for it. So if we want to keep these hairs, it's going to look weird if it's got a dark background in this case. So what I'm going to do for this is I'm actually going to create a clipping mask on top of this. So to do that, I'm just going to hit the plus button to create a new layer. I'm going to call this clip fine hair, just because I can, and I'm going to give it a color. Let's give it an orange color, and I can give the mustache an orange color as well. It's always good just to help you remember where things are. Alright, back to the clip fine hair. For this I'm just going to go B for brush and make sure I've got a nice soft round brush, hitting right click there, and a fairly large brush for this one, and I'm going to select a color. So a quick way to bring up your color picker is just hit the Alt or Option key, and that will bring up your color picker. Hold that down and then just hover around so you can find a good neutral color for your object. So I'm going over here, it's kind of like a dark reddy brown color, and I'm going to then just paint that over the areas that have this sort of white edge. So a nice little soft brush is going to allow me to add that. If your object kind of changes color along the way, don't be shy to pick a new color, but I just want to get just around the edges, get a nice little blend, and by having a big soft brush with this, it will sort of allow it to blend in a little bit more. So you don't want to be, so you want it to blend into the rest of the internal hairs and stuff like that. So there it goes there, that's kind of getting there. Alright, now that in itself looks pretty average. That's definitely not the end point. So what I'm going to do now is I am going to clip this to the layer below, and a clipping mask essentially means that this layer here that I've just created, this little weird drawing, is only going to be visible where the layer below is visible. So all these little hairlines are visible, the background is not. So to do this, select your color layer here, right click and go to create clipping mask, or Shift Control G for those in the know. And it's going to clip it to the layer. So now it's only visible where the layer below is. You can see this little arrow over here. That's going to tell us that that is clipped. Now, downside of that is if I move this layer, it will unclip. So they need to be stacked on top of each other. Alright, now that still doesn't look good. This is where our blend modes could come in handy. So a combination of blend modes and sometimes opacity could help. So if you click on your blend mode, it starts off by saying null. You can actually click on that and hover down, and hopefully you can find one that's going to work for you. So multiply is usually a pretty good one. So that's what normal looks like. Multiply, you can see it's kind of burning that in there. And let's go down. We'll just check out some of the other ones. So depending on what they are, you can just hover down. But I think multiply is pretty good in this case. Yep, I'm going to go with multiply for this one. And as you can see, if I toggle that on and off, you can spot the difference. That's just going to darken that out in there. Alright, so if that's overwhelming, you can lower the opacity of that, but I think we're actually pretty good there. If it does need it, you can add another clipping mask. So I'm just going to add another layer here and right click, create clipping mask, or you can do it after. And in this case, I'm just going to brush over with maybe even like a pretty dark color for this one, and really just hit some of those areas that still have a little bit of light popping through there. Let's even go with pure black, see how that works. Oh yeah. So there is a little hit and miss with this, but again, it's about getting that quality. If it's going to be a perfect image, you do need to consider all of these things. So there's that there. I'm just going to punch through the blend modes until I find one. So in this case, like soft light or overlay is not too bad. Probably need to check my background. I'm just going to lower the opacity in there. So I think, in a pinch, that's a lot better than what we had prior. And if you do need to check, just punch out a different color for your background, and again we can just mix that together and we should get a pretty good combination, and hopefully get something that's going to read a little better than the terrible condition it was in the first one. Now, to try and keep all these clipping masks and stuff back together, if you do want it to be non-destructive, what you can do is shift select those dudes and push the group folder. So if you've got multiple layers selected, it will create a group with everything in there. And I'm going to call this Tash. And again, give it a color to help you find it. And that way, when you move it about, I've got a weird glitch happening there, but that's interesting. You can basically, there we go, let's turn that off. You can basically keep that all together and rescale it and all the rest of it. So that should be pretty good for that when you want to place it on your face, like so. Papa. Now, I know I'm going a lot of nows, but if you do want to have this completely being non-destructive, if you do open that up, we may have an issue if your other layers, your painting layers, aren't smart objects. For some reason, mine jumped out of being a smart object. Doesn't matter. You can actually, rather than putting in a group, you can also combine everything into a smart object. So if you select multiple layers, you can also right click and convert that to a smart object. I'm just going to ungroup this one. There we go. So that is now a smart object that I can scale up and down, and it also has the clipping masks built in. And the cool thing with smart objects, if you do need to edit it, you can either right click over here, and you can, let me see if I can find this. It's one of these ones where it should be around here. Here we go. Convert to layers. I can actually bring this back as the layers if I need to, or you can simply double click on the smart object. This will pop up, hit OK, and then that will open up that entirely in its own entity, and you can further refine that. So it's something worth considering. And then of course, if you save it, it saves through to that. Alright, let's just pop that on there, and we're going to jump out of this one, and then later on we're going to talk about using the pen tool.